Welcome to Marking the End Times. I'm Mark Hitchcock, and it's great to have you with us here and welcome you. I just want to, before I get into the program today, I just want to thank everybody who came to the endtimes.com conference this last week down in Dallas that we had. It was so good to meet so many of you there, and you were so encouraging to me, I know, and to the other speakers as well. And many of you we had a chance to talk. I signed some books and just met with folks there and out in the lobby. And you all were so encouraging to me. So thank you so much for that and for being there. Those of you that participated online, this is going to be, it looks like an annual event that I hope will just continue to build more and more momentum. And it's just a wonderful opportunity to be there with you in person. And to meet many of you and to put real faces with the people behind the camera here that we meet with every week. So thank you so much for that. What I want to talk about this week is on our program is something that's just come out this week. You know, we're all hearing about the debt limit here in America, raising the debt ceiling. But there were several articles that came out this week talking about how the global debt pile has reached $307 trillion this week. So I want to talk about global debt, the debt in America, the coming economic Armageddon that the Bible speaks of, and what we see happening today setting the stage for that. So it's something we see in our country right now as we're fighting again about the raising the debt ceiling. America right now, we just eclipsed the mark of $33 trillion in debt. So I want to talk about that and its implications for end time prophecy. And in a bit, we'll go to the subscriber only section and answer some questions. A good question about do the scriptures allow a woman to be a deacon or a deaconess? So we'll answer that question. Will we know and remember our relationships here on earth and heaven? A good question about the color of the horses, the symbolism of that, and the four horsemen in Revelation chapter 6. When will the judgment seat of Christ take place? That Bema judgment, 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 10. And the final question is, how can we be happy in heaven knowing that people we know and love aren't there with us, that they're in hell? So we'll answer those in a bit in the subscriber only section. But I want to talk about this issue that's out there again. It just kind of comes around, it seems like at least once or twice every year, of raising the debt limit in our nation, the national debt ceiling. But just the entire global debt issue and problem that we see. There was an article in from CNN that says the world has a major debt problem. Is a reset coming? The world is in debt, a record amount of debt. $300 trillion to be exact. Now, it's actually $307 trillion to be exact. That's the total amount that governments, households, and corporations around the world owe. That's estimated by the Institute of International Finance. The number is about 350% of global gross domestic product. Think about this. It's the equivalent of $37,500 of debt for every single person in the world. That's the amount of debt that's out there in our world today. The global public debt is $92 trillion. Again, the total global debt pile, $307 trillion. So the global debt clock is spinning. The global debt clock and the amount of debt grew by around $8 to $10 trillion just in the first quarter of this year. Someone I read this week said the majority of low-income nations are on the cusp of a debt crisis, sparking fears of a global contagion. So the global debt virus has infected the global economic system, and the world is teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, many of these low-income nations. Now, U.S. debt just surpassed this last week $32 trillion. And credit card debt, for the first time in American history, eclipsed $1 trillion. So the U.S. national debt is projected to exceed 100% of gross domestic product in the next 2 years. In around 6 years, the national debt here in America will exceed its all-time high of 106% of the gross domestic product, which occurred in 1946, the year immediately following World War II. Now you can imagine, we know why we had so much debt then, but now it's just because of runaway spending that politicians are not able to curtail. What's happening right now is you have the convergence of rising debt, but also rising interest rates, which is really a deadly cocktail. Now, think about this for a moment, and this may be some of you that I'm speaking to right here on this video. 60% of American families live paycheck to paycheck. Think about that. 6 out of 10 families live paycheck to paycheck. No backstop there for them. I mean, any kind of financial crisis can take them under. Credit card debt in the U.S. has been rising at one of the fastest rates in history. We collectively owe now, as I mentioned earlier, over $1 trillion. In January alone, credit card debt jumped more than 11%. And with interest rates rising, it's getting ahead of debt. Getting ahead of debt is getting harder and harder. And the problem is more Americans are leaning on their credit cards in the face of rising prices, and that debt is getting much, much more expensive. The average credit card user was carrying a balance about a year ago of over $5,500, up 13% just from the year before in 2021. Think about this as well. Even among Americans, which is 18% of Americans make over $100,000 a year. 37% of people making over $100,000 a year don't pay their credit card bill in full every month. So with inflation outpacing incomes, more people are relying on credit cards just to cover everyday expenses in our country, just to buy food and the other necessary things that they have to have. Fewer people are paying off their credit card balances every month. The share of credit card users who carry a balance has increased to 46% from just 39% a year ago. Now, you look at all this and look at this globally, but especially here in America, this is threatening our nation's future, and financial ruin has catastrophic consequences. I want to just mention a couple of those. One is this. I read an article. This is from several years ago. You can probably still find it online. But the title was, it was a cover on Newsweek magazine, and it grabbed my attention because it said, how great powers fall. So this is how empires fall. And the cover showed an upside down U.S. Capitol standing on its dome. And the article said this: steep debt, slow growth, and high spending kill empires. And America could be next. An empire at risk. We won the Cold War and weathered 9/11, but now economic weakness is endangering our global power. Now, they give some history here about how empires decline and die. And it says it begins with debt explosion. And it ends with an inexorable reduction in the resources available for the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. So your debt gets so high that you can't spend the money you need to anymore to defend yourself. It says Habsburg Spain defaulted on all or part of its debt 14 times between 1557 and 1696 and succumbed to inflation due to a surplus of New World silver. Pre-revolutionary France was spending 62% of royal revenue on debt service by 1788. It goes on to say in the Ottoman Empire went the same way. Interest payments and amortization rose from 15% of the budget in 1860 to 50% in 1875. So again, just looking at Spain, France, the Ottoman Empire, what brought all these empires down was the explosion of debt. And so this article that was written called How These Great Powers Fall concluded by saying this: call it the fatal arithmetic or imperial decline. Without radical fiscal reform, it could apply to America next. And we don't think of that very often, just the ruinous consequences of runaway spending and the inability to rein in the massive amount of debt that we are compiling as a nation. So it threatens our national defense. But here's another thing, and this is something that I just thought about this week. It makes people more willing to surrender freedom to the government. The more and more debt that individuals have, the more and more they're in debt, the more and more they're going to be willing to surrender their freedom to the government if the government will help them get out of debt. There's a quote by a best-selling author named Robert Kiyosaki. This is a great quote. He says, when people are struggling financially, they're more willing to have a government save them, unwittingly exchanging their personal freedom for financial salvation. And so it could be that, you look at kind of a global conspiracy that that the government elites want people to go in more and more debt, because the more people get in debt, the more dependent they are on a government to save them. And of course, for the government to save them, there's going to be strings attached of them giving up their freedoms. Think about this as well in our world today. Think of the world kind of teetering on bankruptcy, $307 trillion of global debt. Think about when the rapture happens. You're going to have all the salt and light in this world extracted out of this world in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. Think about the economic collapse in the United States. So you see these events kind of coming together and converging. We see the devastation that's going to take place. So we do know that during the tribulation period, on the third horseman of the apocalypse, the black horse, that there's going to be an explosion of the debt bomb. There's going to be a global economic Armageddon that's coming. There's going to be an incredible polarization of wealth as the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So we see that coming in that third horseman. And what we see today is the setup for that. I want to close by reading a quote to you from a book I read several years ago by David Jeremiah. The name of the book is The Coming Economic Armageddon. And he quotes a passage of Scripture, and then he has a quote from this. I want to read it. It really ministered to me this week. I hope it'll bless you. He quotes Luke 17:26-30. It says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it'll be in the days of the Son of Man. They ate, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, as it was in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even so it will be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. Here's what David Jeremiah says. He says, the people who were living at the time of the flood and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah were simply living their everyday lives. They ate, they drank, they married, they were given in marriage, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. These people went on with their love for the good life as if nothing unusual loomed on the horizon. They refused to heed the warnings and kept on doing what they'd always done until judgment descended and their window of opportunity closed forever. Today, the warning signs are clearer than ever before. This should grip all of us with a sense of urgency about examining our lives and making necessary changes in our priorities. It should spur us to a greater concern about the lives of those we know and love. Where our world is today, people just going on, just spending and living the good life, piling up this debt, and sooner or later the judgment comes. But what we see today happening globally and in our own country with this debt explosion is certainly a setup for what's coming in the end times. It's predicted in Revelation 6. Well, as always, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go into the subscriber-only section and answer these questions about, can women be deacons? Will we know and remember our relationships here on earth and in the life to come? What about the colors of the horses in Revelation 6? When will the judgment seat of Christ happen? And how can we be happy in heaven if we know someone's not there? So we'll look at those questions and answer them. If you're not a member of endtimes.com and you'd like to be, you can go there to endtimes.com and sign up for just $7 a month. And we'd love to welcome you to our community. Well, let's go now to the question and answer session.